For a great cup of joe, there's one thing you should know. Your morning brew can also be playful. Buff Boy Brewing guys make the temperature rise, and you surely feel naughty when you swallow our coffee. If you want some real heat, give your mouth a fine treat. You will want some more, rest assured. Buff Boy Brewing, you can't get enough of.
It's time for The Scribble, your weekly fix of celebrity chats, bizarre stories in the news, and basic random chatter with best-selling author and syndicated radio host Jeremy Bradley. Make sure your seat is in the upright and locked position and your barf bag is securely in place. Here's Jeremy Bradley.
Thank you very much, Larson. Jeremy Bradley here. This is The Scribble. Thanks for tuning in at thescribbleshow.com, on SoundCloud, iTunes, and a whole bunch of other platforms, which I really love, and I did not know that. And so for the longest time, I kept giving the shout-outs to SoundCloud and iTunes, then come to find out that they are the Spotify and a whole bunch of other streaming services and downloadable app things. There we go. I'm really into the podcast lingo. That's right, everybody. But thanks for tuning in today. You know, April is always a big month for me entrepreneurially. Great, hey, when I have to speak for a living and I can pronounce those big words. But I have a lot of celebrations in April. I don't know what it is, but somehow my creative juices are just flowing in the month. And so we celebrated an anniversary last week, and then we celebrate another one. Is it next week already? I think it's the 24th. And I don't remember the actual dates, right? That's where I just have that reminder come up on my phone calendar. This coming from the guy who wrote the book, Put Down Your Damn Phone Already. Anyhow, I'm going to tell you about the celebrations that we have coming up, or that have just passed, when we continue on with the Scribble. How I've made 217 episodes of this G-Damn show, I don't know, but we're going to start the celebration here on the podcast right after this.
Who are the Kardashians feuding with now? What did that little thug Justin Bieber do this time? Who's getting hitched? And who's headed for Splitsville? Hear the latest celebrity news and gossip every day on Entertainment Wrap-Up. The good, the bad, the ugly, but mostly the ridiculously hilarious. It's all recapped in this daily segment at entertainmentwrapup.com. Have a laugh at the expense of the rich and famous when they take themselves way too seriously. It's 3 minutes of time-wasting fun at entertainmentwrapup.com. Check out Entertainment Wrap-Up at entertainmentwrapup.com. Brought to you by Speak Free Books.
JB here, back on the Scribble. So April is really a cool month for me because it's basically a month of celebration. Now, 14 years ago on April 9th, was that even the date? I've got to check that now because I'm not quite sure. It was Monday. What was the date on Monday? Was that the 8th? Yes, it was. The 9th. What did I say? I'm already losing it, everybody. This is how good the show is going to be today. I started a website called SpeakFreeWithJB.com. Now, I was a recent college dropout, and the only reason being was that my parents weren't helping me pay for school, and I could not afford to go. I could not afford to finish my final year. Coincidentally, I could have, I guess, just robbed a bank and used the money like my journalism instructor did, Steve Vogelsang. Not making a joke, true story. Look it up, Steve Vogelsang, Winnipeg bank robbery. And he truly was my journalism instructor. Nevertheless, back on track here. Because I dropped out and I wanted to work in the industry, in the meantime, I just started to look for any ways that I could make money. And I'm not talking about going out and whoring myself. I'm talking about within the industry, in the newspaper, in media, any sort of media-type newspaper-ish kind of job, whether it had to do with reporting or writing a column, anything. I wanted to be in newspapers. That was my big thing. And what I started to do, this is before the days of social media and, blogging and website, there were websites. I would spend hours and hours and hours, literally hours, every night going to every newspaper website in Canada. And again, like I would type in like British Columbia newspapers, and then I would find, every single one of them. I would go to every website and find either the publisher or the email or the editor's email address. I'm very excited. That's why I'm sort of tripping all over my words today. And so I would find the contact information and I put it into a Word document. Now, by the end of, I don't even know how long, maybe I would say 2 weeks, I had amassed about 600 or so email addresses for newspapers across Canada. And then what I started to do was I guess the term would be spamming, but it's industry related. I mean, I was sending them content, so it was unsolicited. If that's the definition of spam, I guess I was spamming them. Anyhow, I would write a blasting commentary about just some sort of a opinion. Didn't have to be, it wasn't criticizing anything that they reported on. It just had maybe an opinion that was different. You know, those conservative talk show hosts do that just to poke at people. I wasn't that extreme, but I certainly was a little bit off the wall in some of my commentaries. And what I would do is every Monday I would basically just email them a commentary piece, whether they wanted it or not. Now, some of them would take that as a letter to the editor and would run it as such. Well, very quickly I would fire back and say, excuse me, not a letter to the editor. I'm a writer. You're going to pay me if you want to use my content. Didn't quite work all the time, though it did work in some instances. And so there was eventually a newspaper in my home province of Manitoba picked me up, and believe it or not, to this day, 13 and a half years later, I am still the columnist in the Southeast Journal in Emerson, Manitoba. And what I was doing was I was writing these columns, and I thought, well, I still want people to see them whether they're in the newspaper or not. And so I went on to Microsoft Publisher, and I figured out how to make a website, and I basically just you remember Publisher, right? I would make the pages, and I would post the column on it. And at the bottom of it, I would put, that's my point, what's yours? And I would solicit people's feedback. So I'm going to make a very bold claim here, and I'm totally serious, I'm not joking. I believe I pioneered commenting on websites. Especially news, because, back in the day, you kind of just had the facts and that was it. There wasn't really room for commentary and people's opinions and what have you. And so I started to do that. Now, this was very clunky website design because I still don't know how to design a website. But you would basically fill out the form in Microsoft Publisher and you'd hit send and then it would email it to me, on like a Yahoo email address or something anyway. And basically I would review it and then I would go and manually post it. I would basically go and update the page, put another little text box underneath it, and add your comment. And I would do that. The website is speakfreewithjb.com. It is still online to this day. We actually just did a major redesign about a year ago because it was still kind of dumpy looking. But definitely, that's what kicked off my radio shows, my best-selling books, and everything else that I have on the go professionally. I'm going to talk about how the newspaper column then turned into radio shows right after this.
Isn't it crazy that you wait for payday, but before you know it, you're strapped for cash again? It's time to stop blowing your money and become a smart spender with the book, The Official Guide to Being an American Cheapskate at cheapskatebook.com. Learn simple ways to cut costs at home every day and during special times of the year. Don't go broke at Christmas. Don't remortgage the house for a fancy vacation. The book is filled with tips to save you money throughout the year. Check out the best-selling book, The Official Guide to Being an American Cheapskate at cheapskatebook.com or on Amazon and iTunes.
Jeremy Bradley here, back at the controls in the last segment talking about 14 years of the speakfreewithjb.com website. And if you haven't done that, if you haven't done it, if you haven't checked it out, absolutely do it while you're listening to this. And what's interesting was when I was reaching out to these newspapers, as I was telling you about, I got some people who were encouraging and obviously could tell that I was a student or an amateur, beginner, whatever word you want to use. And then there was one person in Alberta that got a little bit, she kind of took a dig and was like, you know what, I would suggest a different career path. That was sort of the gist of it. I read it once, and it got me so mad. I'm sure if I look in my inbox from my Outlook from, back in the day, I'm pretty sure I still have that email, and it would be interesting to find out where that person is now, because I did end up looking up, being the vindictive dick that I was, I did look it up to see, and that this woman was running, the family newspaper, essentially got it handed down to her, sort of a deal. And, I never did kind of fire back after that, though. I just sort of left it. And I remembered that, though. I remembered that when I started to have success, I thought, well, you know what, I'll show you. And that's been the mentality of my entrepreneurial life since then. So what happened was, yes, I was writing this column every week, and the paper in Manitoba did like it. And then I just continued to send out to other papers. And eventually 2 other papers in Alberta, Alberta is a province in Canada, if you're not familiar, 2 other papers wanted to get in on it. And so I thought, hey, wait a second, I'm onto something here. I can write one column and sell it a bunch of different times, do the work once, and cash on it multiple ways. Then things took an interesting turn when a radio station in Vancouver reached out to me. This is an internet radio station. At the time, internet radio was still very new. Like I said, about 14 years ago, so things hadn't quite evolved, and it was all really new. It was very, very new and exciting. And so they had asked me if I could record it for their radio station. They had kind of like a chat show one night a week, and they said, this would be great at the top of the hour just to kind of have this opinion piece, and, we'll run it, and there we go. We'll just break it up. And so I said, well, okay, show me the money. And very quickly then, I was writing the content for newspapers, my own website, and recording it for radio, right? So I'm cashing in on the one piece 3 different ways. Well, I developed a relationship with the guys at the radio station, and they asked me to host a show. And I said no, I had no interest in doing that. And then they said, well, how about just co-hosting a show? What about just co-host? Call in, we'll have you on the phone. It's like a 2-hour thing. We'll just go back and forth, make some jokes, have some laughs, and it's just really casual. And I said, okay, cool, fine, whatever. And secretly, and I didn't realize it at the time, I actually did have a fascination with radio back in the day. I used to make those mixtapes, right? And I would DJ it, and I would introduce the next song. It took me a long time to come up with that, to make that connection. It really did. And so I had some conversations with them on the air. And then they asked me again, do you want to host a show? And I said, no, my dream is I'm going to be a newspaper columnist, newspaper reporter. I'm going to work for the Winnipeg Free Press, which was right across the street from my high school. I would see it every day when I was leaving, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to be. It was the radio DJ at the time is what you called them, and that wasn't me. And finally, I agreed. On one Monday night, they said, you know what? We just need somebody to fill in like a 2-hour slot. You don't have to worry about, we'll pick the music. You just need to talk for a minute and a half every, 15 minutes or whatever it was. And again, I was sort of like, well, I don't know what to talk about. I haven't done this before. And I took it seriously on the weekend. Again, I was living with my parents. I went upstairs, took my laptop, laid on the couch. They were at the lake for the summer. And I just started to write a bunch of different silly stories. And I recorded them, sent them to the station. I didn't do the show live. And they put it into play. And I started to, get emails from people because I would say to email me, let me know what you think. Do you tell me your thoughts on this? Just like a regular radio host would do, right? I'd listened to enough radio, so I knew how it worked. And very quickly, people were tuning in and emailing me like crazy. And even the radio station said, we're looking at the statistics of listeners. I mean, this is the most that we've had. This is a big number. And they said, do you want to do this again next week? And so again, sort of the ego kind of came into play, right? And I was like, I guess I could, maybe. And so I agreed to it, and I have hosted that show ever since. Now, that's not on the same radio station because that station only survived for about maybe another year after that. But here's what I did. Much like the newspapers, I said, okay, well, let me figure out how I can, make money from this. Do I have content here that could be for more than one channel, more than one station, more than one outlet, more than one, frequency station? And I said, you know what, I think maybe that's what I'll do, is that I'll shop this around and try to get other internet radio stations on board with this show. It's a 2-hour show. They would get it prepackaged. They just have to download it and run it. And I started to do that. And again, because it was an engaging style of conversation or chatter, they really liked it. And it became a really popular show. And by the end of the year, I was able to get 13 radio stations. Now, again, keeping in mind that at the time, internet radio stations were coming up hot and heavy, very, very frequently. And none of them really had the business sense to sort of make it. Because people wanted to get in on the trend, but they didn't exactly know how to make money. And I then just continued doing my show. And because I had amassed so many stations broadcasting me, I really didn't care if one of them went under. And, they disappeared. And it's probably a terrible attitude to have, but at the end of the day, I was going for quantity. I wanted as many stations as I could. And I used Excel, and I basically created a chart, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I mapped out when my show was airing on which station, and would then neurotically go and listen to see if it was running. And I would sort of be monitoring my show. And if the station, didn't start it at the top of the hour, or they played the wrong show, I would get on them and I would threaten to take my show away from them. And, it was really ballsy. It was really, like, who are you, kid? But again, my show, I was onto something with the show. And now, fast forward 14 years later, that top of the charts will have been on the air 14 years next week. Again, it's the 20-something of April. And so that's kind of how the Speak Free with JB website started and how it's turned into the syndicated radio shows. Now, from there, top of the charts has turned into a daily entertainment headline show. We've got our syndicated country music show. We've got the Scribble podcast. We had a meeting the other day and I said, I host too much stuff. I do too much hosting. And, but it's fun. I really enjoy it. I like talking. I like, we have celebrities on the shows all the time. You've heard them here on the podcast. And it's kind of interesting. Now, I can tell you how I got those celebrity guests and red carpet events coming up in the next segment. I'm going to do that. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
Ever had something to get off your chest but never had the balls to say it? That's a load of crap. Speak Free with JB.com is exactly what you've been waiting for. Your chance to tell it like it is and not care what anybody else thinks. Have your say on issues of the day. Join newspaper and radio columnist Jeremy Bradley as he tells it like it is. Hundreds of thousands of people have stopped by, including some well-known celebrities who have had a chat with JB and speak candidly about what's really going on in the world. You can join them too. Have a rant or a rave. Be brave and head on over to www.speakfreewithjb.com now.
Jeremy Bradley here on the Scribble, continuing on. Is this my life story? In a way, it sort of is. My professional life story. How did I get involved in interviewing celebrities and covering red carpets? Well, at the time when the radio shows were starting out, David Letterman, Jay Leno, right? They all had those late night shows, and then they would have a monologue. That's where they talked about celebrities for the most part and made fun of them. So they'd tell a story about something and they'd set up the punchline, right? You've seen that, and the new guys do it now too, right? Seth Meyers. Colbert generally is laying into Donald Trump for the most part. So I was never that blasting, but I would basically tell a celebrity story and then I would have them make a joke about it. And then that was it only got me so far. I was kind of like, this isn't really original. Let me try to interview celebrities. Now, at the time, again, remember, I was in Canada, and the audience was fairly small. But, of course, I had big ambitions. I had big dreams. Okay, well, I'm going to get the people from, the big shows on CBS and Fox and NBC and whatever. No, it didn't work out that way. In fact, when I would call some of these publicists, once I sort of figured out how this whole thing works, I would just randomly call publicists and be like, hey, I want Charlie Sheen from 2.5 Men. Thank you. And that wouldn't get me anywhere. In fact, when I would call from Winnipeg, my hometown, apparently it would come up on the phone Manitoba. And there was a vice president of publicity at a network, I'm not going to tell you which one, CBS, and she would hang up on me. I told you, talk to Global. Global is a television network in Canada. I told you to talk to Global, hang up. Well, wouldn't you know that a few years later, maybe about 10 years later or so, it came full circle that one of the celebrities that I was attempting to interview back in the day and she would hang up on me about, well, there was another VP of publicity who I reached out to, got a good working relationship with him, and he copied her on an email saying, oh yeah, she'd be happy to help you out with that. She didn't remember me, but it was funny because I thought it's come full circle now that we go from her hanging up, wanting nothing to do with me, but then one of her colleagues is like, yeah, we can arrange that. Yeah, let's do that. And I thought, there we go. That is the moment, everybody. That was the moment. Now, the way that happened, though, was I had to do a lot of work. I had to go to Canadian Idol in Toronto, CTV, the big network in Canada. I was able to, just basically get them to, give me a shot, right? I'm this guy from Winnipeg. I've got a little bit to show for myself. I wasn't too unprofessional. But then I was sort of like, okay, but this show isn't really that big right now. Nevertheless, it was still content, and content is king, and it gave me something to show for myself, that I was credible. I got access to this, and it was good. And so that was kind of my starting block. That was my starting point, was Canadian media. and then Canadian red carpets, and then it slowly, very gradually branched into the United States, where I was then covering the America's Got Talent finale and the red carpet in Los Angeles, and the TV Land Awards in New York City, and the American Country Awards in Las Vegas. So, it was really good. It was really quite a long journey, but very rewarding in the end. Very rewarding in the end. More of my work life right after this.
It's never too early to start thinking about your next holiday. Have you checked out Mexico recently? From tequila tasting, swimming with horses, to ziplining through the jungle and watching whales and dolphins in their natural habitat, Puerto Vallarta has it all. Visit mexico.jbonair.com to see all the fun PV has to offer. That's at mexico.jbonair.com for hundreds of photos, interviews, and videos from around the tourist hotspot. Check out mexico.jbonair.com for all the fun. That's mexico.jbonair.com.
Ever had something to get off your chest but never had the balls to say it? That's a load of crap. Speak Free with JB.com is exactly what you've been waiting for. Your chance to tell it like it is and not care what anybody else thinks. Have your say on issues of the day. Join newspaper and radio columnist Jeremy Bradley as he tells it like it is. Hundreds of thousands of people have stopped by, including some well-known celebrities who have had a chat with JB and speak candidly about what's really going on in the world. You can join them too. Have a rant or a rave. Be brave and head on over to www.speakfreewithjb.com now.
Jeremy Bradley here, back on the Scribble, continuing the, what did you guys call it? The pat yourself on the back world tour. Anyway, no, you know what, here's the deal. I wrote a newspaper column about it, a syndicated newspaper column about it not too long ago, that you should celebrate your accomplishments, really. And I also talked about that at New Year's, when, you sort of, everybody kind of is like, oh, thank God that the year is over, a new one. Hold on, I gotta readjust myself in this seat here. I'm sitting awkwardly and my legs are cramping up because I'm old. And, I say that, like, reflect back on the year that is passing and look at the things that you did, the things you accomplished, what you got out of it. Everybody is just like, like the past is the past, move on. No, but if you do some really great things, and, this maybe sounds a little bit motivational speaker-ish, but, go back through the months and say, okay, what happened in January? Oh, okay, you know what, February I kicked that bad habit. Okay, March I started to work out. Okay, April I blah, 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 blah. Or I had a really, really big opportunity, at work in June. Or, like, look at those things instead of being negative, like, oh, great that the year's over. Like, celebrate it. It's, I don't know. So that's just what I do. I like to stay positive. I went through a really, really bad depression several years ago, well, maybe close to 15 years ago now, where I totally felt unsupported. I needed people to make me feel better. And I had to sort of look at that and go, wait a second, I need to make myself feel better, not depend on somebody else to do that for me. And then every time I heard a no, every time, a publicist would hang up on me, or a newspaper publisher would say, I think you need a new career, a new line of work, that made me push, even harder to be successful and to make things happen. So that's really what it was. I think that if I just let a no prevent me from trying again or doing anything else, well, then absolutely I wouldn't have had, all of this success. Not to say that I'm like, a wealthy, multi-millionaire entrepreneur. That's not the case at all. Bottom line is, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. It's fun to just go to Los Angeles and hang out with celebrities and talk to them and do whatever. And, I have a good time doing that. So that's really what it is. You've got to focus at the task at hand. I went into the radio shows, at least, with the mindset of, okay, well, I'm going to make a business out of this. I'm not going to be like those internet radio guys that, well, they just liked radio and so they wanted to make a station. I took it a little bit more seriously and thought, okay, well, wait, what do I need to do to make money from this? And I originally thought, well, I could sell the show to stations and they could buy it every week. And then I realized that they're licensing the music for the show anyway, since they're technically the broadcaster. I could make the show available free to them, and then they give me the 2 hours of airtime where I can promote things and run my own commercials if need be. And so I started to do that. And then I was able to get actual syndication commercials that would be, 800 numbers. You probably see them late at night, or you hear them on your local radio stations in the middle of the night, or on TV even, where it's like the medication commercials or the free trial. Use code TV1, TV2. That's basically what it is that a station has unsold inventory being commercial time, 30-second spots or 60-second spots, and they don't have anybody to fill that commercial time. And so you get one of those, it drops in as an actual commercial, and you get, a few dollars every time somebody signs up, or you get, $20 if somebody calls the 800 number for 30 seconds. Like that's kind of what I started doing, and it ended up being very lucrative because, again, the stations were running my show at different times of the day, different days of the week. And we had a big audience, a really huge audience, and so I started to do that. I had no desire to start going and selling commercial time. Now create a media kit and then pitch companies and find marketing departments and do all that other stuff. Hey, you know what? If this agency already has the commercials that I can just add into my thing, it's not going to cost them anything. If nobody, if nobody calls, then it's fine. Because they're not paying for the actual airtime, right? So that's how I started to do it, was that I was looking for ways to make money. And again, it was very gradual. It was very slow coming in at the beginning. But, I started to do that. And at least I took the initiative, is what I'm saying. If I would have just kind of sat back and, waited for other people to open those doors for me or to give me those opportunities, no, I probably would not have accomplished what I have. It's interesting to be sitting in this studio here, and behind my back is the Wall of Fame, and it's not a collage, but it's all the pictures or many pictures from the red carpets that I've gone on, and me with celebrities, and having a good time. And if ever I'm having a bad day and I'm kind of like, oh my god, I don't want to do this radio show anymore. Oh, I just don't feel like. I go and say, I look at that wall and I go, you know what, that was pretty cool. That was pretty cool to go and talk to Donald Trump on the sidewalk outside the Trump building after Celebrity Apprentice. And it was kind of funny to have Howie Mandel crash the radio show when I was talking with Sharon Osbourne at the America's Got Talent finale. Oh, and it was pretty cool to have the cast of, the finalists from American Idol backstage in Vancouver before their big concert. So, there's been so many great things that, it all stems from this Speak Free with JB website that I was talking about. I really believe that. If I hadn't started that and being, an opinionated dick, newspapers wouldn't have picked it up. The radio station would not have read it in the newspaper, or the people from the radio station. A radio station can't read. The people can, I hope. And then, like I said, it's just a domino effect or snowball effect, because things just got bigger and bigger. And then I started to write books and have a best-selling book. And, it's just, we have some... My dogs have a freaking line of greeting cards. We license the photos of my dogs. So... do I have a marketing degree? Did I even finish my communications degree? No, neither of those happened in my life. And it's just pretty cool, because I think marketing a lot of times is just creativity. Now, naturally, if you hear an actual marketing person talk about it, they're going to disagree, right? They want you to do that. And it's the same thing why I've never been invited to go and speak at my college after dropping out, because, clearly I'm going to say to the students, here's the deal. You don't need this college program to make it big. And I think that you do, though. Not everybody has that business sense. Not everybody has that sort of creative flair to make things happen, or be ballsy enough just to do things like that. So that's kind of my story. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I haven't bored you to death. But I think if you have a hunger for business or entrepreneurialism, you might actually find it to be an appealing story that gives you some insight as to what you can do. Again, have I made mistakes along the way? Of course I have. Of course I have. But I don't let that stop me. I learn from those. And as trite, is that the good word? As trite as it sounds, I have learned from them. When I wrote my first book that just tanked, it bombed, it did absolutely nothing, I was devastated, because like many authors, I thought, okay, everybody's going to love this book. It's going to be great. It's going to fly off the shelves. I'm going to do book signings. There's going to be lineups and blah, 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 blah. That's not the reality of it. It's really not. And so I had to sort of go back to the drawing board then and look at what I was doing. Sure, when you're an author, you want to just be the writer, right? You just want to be the person who comes up with the words. You don't necessarily want to be the marketing person and do it all. But there's also something that's so much more rewarding with that. And by the way, if you get a book deal and you don't get some sort of a huge advance on your pay, you're going to likely be making about $1 per book, if not 60-something cents once everybody gets their cut, right? The literary agent, the book publisher, the retail store. So anyway, that's just some insight for me here on the Scribble. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back to wrap things up right after this.
We hear you chirping. Get scribbling. Tweet up the Scribble at The Scribble Show. Join the discussion with Jeremy Bradley. It's all going down right now on Twitter at The Scribble Show and at thescribbleshow.com.
We're out of time, and you know what? Much like the speakfreewithjb.com website, I want to hear your thoughts and comments and opinions on this. If you've got a similar business story or you even just have some questions, hit me up. I'd love to hear from you. live@jbonair.com is the email address. live@jbonair.com. I will talk to you same time, same place next week here on The Scribble. My name is Jeremy Bradley. Bye-bye, everybody.
Want more Scribble? Check out thescribbleshow.com for past shows, celebrity interviews, cheapskate tips, and more. That's at thescribbleshow.com and on Twitter at The Scribble Show. The Scribble is a Speak Free media presentation.
If you want some real heat